Hello, I'm an abomination, and welcome to the hard sell where the stick in the swill-bucket rattles back. As you can see, today we're back on the road again for a Not Brand X episode. This episode was suggested by Glenn Rubin, and you can have me say your name aloud too if you sign up to patreon.com/applemask. And I'm not going to draw the subject matter out like some kind of mystery. I mean, look at this horrible thing I'm portrayed as in this episode. It is, of course, about Little Chef. The iconic roadside diners that were everywhere at one point, specifically the 70s and 80s. Technically, Little Chef has been dead for 4 years, but recently the last holding company to own the name and branding has been liquidated too, which is like death plus. Its history begins when Ray Kroc was still a milkshake mixer and franchise agent. It was founded in 1958 by Sam Alper, caravan designer, viticulturist, sculptor, philanthropist, Olympic fencing champion, shadow home secretary and celebrity pharmacist. On a trip to America, Alper had discovered the concept of the roadside diner. With the road network constantly expanding, it seemed like a great way to turn a profit, especially since they were made with prefab materials and staffed just enough to keep them going. He took the name Little Chef from one they'd found in Leedy, Oklahoma. They even ripped off the mascot, a chubby little toque sporter they eventually named Fat Charlie. They grew nicely over the course of the 60s, but their imperial phase came in 1970, when, what with one thing and another, they found themselves part of Europe's biggest travel catering hotel group, the legendary Trust House 40. Now they had the resources to explode across the entire country, subject to planning laws of course. To get around those, at first they simply bribed various independent roadside diners to sell up and bugger off. But that was hardly sustainable and also kind of monstrous, so by the mid-70s they hit on the old franchise method Ray Kroc had invented, where the indies could join up instead of selling up. By a combination of these tactics, by 1976 there were 176 of the bastard things in the UK, and bigger ones had started expanding into full-blown motels. This was very much the golden age for Fat Charlie, but naturally he still faced competition. The big American outlets were creeping up, of course, wiping bread knives on their thighs. But while they got established, the chef's main rival was the Happy Eater, which was more or less identical as an experience, except with a disturbing, bulimic Pac-Man logo. A sort of grinning avatar of eating disorders. Clearly not a patch on Fat Charlie, who got his most definitive look early in the Forte era, and was as much a roadside icon for the UK as Burma Shave adverts were in America. Not that he didn't have his own creep factor. The earliest Little Chef advert I could find was this, from the early 80s, which leans heavily into the mascot's nosy bonk factor.
On your travels, you've probably passed a number of little chefs, tempting you by the roadside.
Early starter? Prawn salad. Steak platter.
Jesus. That nightmarish line of Walking Dead is unsettling enough. Was it really necessary to play it quite so specifically like a horror movie in the editing, and particularly in the soundtrack? Did they hire John Carpenter for the music or what?
Jubilee pancakes.
So take heed, dear traveller, for once you have sampled their delicious cooking, you find a Little Chef is unsurpassable.
In trying to make a sort of comical takeoff of folkloric horror, they've actually created some actual, genuine, and even quite effective folkloric horror, which the switch to Johnny Carnival music at the punchline doesn't really mitigate. At least he gave me a costume for this episode.
Once you have sampled their delicious cooking, you find a Little Chef is unsurpassable.
Understandably, Fat Charlie was played down in the next major national campaign a few years later, in favour of emphasising the experience itself.
Well, I'd like eggs and bacon, I'd like toast and jam, I'd like prawns and salad, 'cause we're all Little Chef fans.
Well, there's one way of getting the menu out there, I'll give it that.
Well, I'd like chips and burgers, I'd like cottage cheese,
I'd like a cherry pancake.
make mine a special, please.
I can't tell if this bit is transphobic or sexist or just nothing. That's what comes of leaving Twitter.
Well, we like shakes and ice cream. I'd like tea and buns. That's what the little chef serves me. The little chef's lots more fun.
What would they like then?
Well, they'd like eggs and bacon. They'd like toast and jam.
You are going to get slow bloody service if everyone has to sing everything, though. Leaving aside the inherent crapness of the premise, though, it is an efficient advert, essentially reciting the menu as an earworm, demonstrating the variety of food available, which, to be fair, is more deep than wide, and thereby supporting the slogan, Little Chef, Big Choice, of which they were very proud because they stuck with it intermittently for years. They remained bullish as the 80s wore on, at least in the advertising. These posters from the turn of the decade speak of confidence, the strong close-ups, unapologetic white space, and bold lettering. There's a swagger to that sort of future condensed, a sense of folded arms and self-satisfaction. And why not? By now, Trust House Forte was even bigger, having acquired both the service station chain Welcome Break and, of all things, Happy Eater, which was gradually absorbed until all former Happy Eaters had become Little Chefs. If this sounds like a victory for Little Chef, it's only because I'm deliberately making it sound that way for the purposes of injecting drama into the narrative because I'm a manipulative bastard. Happy Eater was the only serious domestic rival for Little Chef for a long time. They were the big fish in the small pond. But those roadside diners that inspired Sam Alper in the first place had now made it across the Atlantic. McDonald's, Burger King, Pizza Hut, Subway, Rax, right, not Rax, but some of the biggest brands in the known multiverse. The pond hadn't got any bigger, but the fish had. In a situation like this, it's a good idea to double down on the existing image, like McDonald's centering their advertising on the Golden Arches logo after a very slight wobble at the turn of the century. And so Fat Charlie developed a voice, specifically Nick Hancock's.
Who understands that some people like a freshly cooked breakfast last thing at night? And who's happy if you want a freshly cooked dinner first thing in the morning? In fact, who serves up whatever you want, whenever you want it? Freshly cooked, morning, noon and night. I do.
Technically, he'd had a voice before, of course, in fact several. But that was when he was a limitless multi-corporeal being haunting Britain's roadways in an infinite progression of dead-eyed bodies. This was a lot less terrifying and eldritch. It doesn't seem to have caught on, though, because only a couple of years later they were using basically the same footage in a more detached, third-person way.
Little chef, we don't tell you when to have breakfast. We don't tell you what to have for breakfast. Or when to have lunch. Or what to have for lunch. Or when to have tea. Or what to have for tea. We just cook what you want when you want it. Morning, noon, and night. Little chef, turn left. We get it right.
Or maybe it was the other way around. I haven't actually been able to ascertain the dates for certain, so it's entirely possible that the animated Nick Hancock Fat Charlie was the late edition, to give the setup more oomph and personality. And if that's the case, they've mostly succeeded in replicating the feel of a contemporaneous daytime cookery magazine show, which is reasonably close to what they were going for, I think. I blame the music. And that whole turn left, we get it right thing, which either replaced it or which it replaced, has the seed of a nice idea within it, but I haven't quite come to grips with the premise.
I do.
So now it's the mid-90s, and Little Chef are really feeling the pinch. To make matters worse, the parent company, Trust House Forte, is about to become the subject of a massive, aggressive and acrimonious takeover bid from Granada. Yes, the same company that ran the ITV franchise. They had their fingers in many pies, remember. Hospitality was one of them. And in 1996, their empire of service stations absorbed the motherlode in a takeover so aggressive it was practically an act of violence. Just like Anglia bordering HTV, It's under Granada that things start to go wrong for Little Chef. The quality of the food, which was none too clever in the first place, actually manages to go down, while prices go up to such an astronomical level that the chain acquires the nickname Little Thief. Unsurprisingly, the next campaign is all about value.
When kids come to a Little Chef, they can enjoy a 2-course meal from the children's set menu absolutely free. All they have to do is bring along an adult who spends a £5.
Which shouldn't be too difficult, because at this point a £5 in Little Chef will get you half a cup of tea and a biscotti. There's a new spin for Fat Charlie too.
Where can you get a bigger breakfast? With all the toast you can eat for under a £5. A Little Chef goes a long way.
I quite like it actually. It doesn't have the faintly eerie cutesiness of the talking Nick Hancock road sign, or the downright surreal horror of the previous live-action incarnation. It's more iconic. In fact, it's almost entirely iconic, since all you can really see of the character is the toque and the results of his actions. By not fully depicting the chef, it utilises something the comic scholar Scott McCloud calls closure, the phenomenon whereby we observe the parts but perceive the whole. We actually only see the toque and the things he's carrying, and we fill in the rest, presumably along the lines of Fat Charlie himself. But because we have gone to that effort, have been forced to, really, it means we identify just a little more with the character. Just a little, we just brought a tiny bit closer to him, and none of it's conscious. It's just a function of how our perception works. It's probably not even deliberate on the advertiser's part. A bit like your mum. Sorry, I just threw that bit in to break up the OU lecture style of this bit.
Where can you get a choice from 3 starters and 3 main courses for under a £5? A Little Chef goes a long way.
Anyway, even if I was talking a load of old bollocks there, which I definitely wasn't, the almost unseen version of Fat Charlie had real potential to enhance the brand. It's just a shame the brand was at such a low point. Even their new owners Granada didn't seem to particularly care for it, except as one of several assets they come to own over the past decade. They were much more interested by now in expanding their media empire. So at the turn of the century they absorbed yet another rival, Compass, and then spat them out again, with all their catering and hospitality assets attached, leaving them with no distractions in their relentless and ultimately successful pursuit of all of ITV. Their third branch, the rental business, had already gone up the swanny with the rest of the industry. As for poor old Little Chef, he was well on the skids by now, reduced to making vague and rather sad allusions to popular TV shows.
Little Chef's 2-course meal deal, only $5.99.
No, that's right up my street.
As Percy Sugden goes, so goes the nation. Or perhaps not. Even the food is looking decidedly unimpressive. Not that it was ever impressive. We're not talking gourmet Savoy grill stuff to begin with, but the greasy platters of sausages and bacon and fried breads were at least well shot in earlier adverts, sizzling and moist and backlit. It's the difference between the black and white Anglia Night and the colour one. It's the same cheap pewter figurine in both cases, but the first version made an effort to make it look impressive. The second version just sort of looks at it, with a dead-eyed gawp. Much like the camera here looks at this sad plate full of chips, peas, and heartbreakingly mediocre breaded fish. Of course, you could just argue that this represents an outbreak of basic honesty on their part about the quality of their product, but honesty is rarely the best policy in advertising, especially when you're advertising sad little unremarkable proletarian meals. They tried a reality TV makeover in 2009 because that was fashionable, hiring kitchen surrealist Heston Blumenthal to revamp the menu at one branch, and then gamely trying to apply the same principle at others when it appeared to work. Fat Charlie got a makeover at the same time, with a broader smile, a more up-to-date uniform, and no cloche. The Blumenthal thing managed to spread to 11 branches before the novelty wore off for both consumers and company, and the brand continued on its journey to eventual oblivion. The name changing hands occasionally between one set of carpetbaggers or another, ending up in the hands of Count Food Group, a Kuwaiti conglomerate who are also the current owners of Burger King, Pizza Hut and Applebee's. The last actual restaurants closed down at the start of 2018. And just a month ago, Count announced they were winding up the subsidiary that held the dormant Little Chef brand. That leaves Fat Charlie in limbo. And in theory, the name is available to anyone with the means to buy it for whatever purpose. I wouldn't hold my breath, though. It died for a reason, and that reason is still valid. That its sector contains some of the biggest, most ruthless, and seriously biggest businesses of any sort in the entire history of mankind. If you've got the cash and the wherewithal to bring it back, then Godspeed, but you're going up against McDonald's here. You better have a plan. Remember the great Zavi revival? Exactly. You just sat through a Bob the Fish production. Nice! If you haven't already, you absolutely must check out bobthefish.org.uk. Literally hundreds more videos not unlike that one, adding up to days worth of entertainment and all absolutely free. But if you're not a cold-hearted skinflint, you can always support us on Patreon. For as little as anything at all, you can make programs like the one you just watched possible in the first place, and become eligible for bonus material such as glimpses of the book I'm writing about the BBC, monthly riffings on random commercial breaks, the complete archives of the angry political satire magazine Two Sons, and even the odd very occasional bonus video essay unavailable anywhere else. If nothing else, you should prevent me from starving and or freezing to death in the foreseeable future, so that'd be nice. No pressure or anything. bobthefish.org.uk. You make it what it is.